Distracted from God, a 5-year worldwide study. I'm Mike Zigarelli. There are many obstacles to faithful living, whether it's obstacles within us, like our pride or greed or fear, or obstacles outside of us, like the environment in which we live or work. Daily surrender to God can be a daily challenge. At the top of that obstacles list for some people is today's frenetic pace of life. Busyness, hurry, overload, burnout, overextension, it's known by many names. But there's one common outcome. The accelerated pace and activity level of the modern day distracts us from God and separates us from the abundant, joyful life He desires for us. For the past 5 years, I've researched the pervasiveness of this overload problem among Christians. What God is revealing through this study is quite arresting. One might even say scandalous. It seems that Christians worldwide are simply becoming too busy for God. In particular, I've collected data from more than 20,000 Christians aged 15 to 88 across 139 countries using an online tool called the Obstacles to Growth Survey, which you can find at the website on your screen. And as you can see from this table, most of the respondents came from North America, but there are thousands from other continents as well. And the country breakdown looks like this. Simply pause the video if you want to take a closer look. Among the many survey items in the Obstacles to Growth survey are several items related to busyness, hurry, and overload in one's life. For example, here are some of the findings for the survey item, I rush from task to task. Survey takers had the option of selecting this statement is never true of me, rarely true of me, sometimes true of me, often true of me, or this statement is always true of me. And what you're seeing here is the percentage of survey respondents on each continent who say that this statement is often or always true of them. In other words, these bars represent the percentage of Christians who are usually hurrying through their day. On average, more than 4 in 10 Christians around the world say that it's often or always true of them, with results varying slightly by both continent and gender. Notable here, I think, is first of all the ubiquity of the problem around the world. Busyness and hurry are not problems that are unique to the United States or to the West, as some might suspect, but seem to be pervasive globally. Moreover, the pace of life issue is not predominantly a male or a female issue. Both genders are afflicted, with men only slightly outpacing women everywhere, except in North America, where women report rushing from task to task a bit more often than do men. By the way, all gender differences here are statistically significant at the 5% level. Looking at the individual country results is also illuminating. Pace of life seems to vary greatly for Christians across these countries, with Christians reporting the greatest challenges in Japan, the Philippines, South Africa, the UK, Mexico, and Indonesia, and the least challenge in Uganda, Nigeria, Malaysia, and Kenya. Still, even in these less hurried cultures, about 1 in 3 Christians report that it's their default condition to rush from task to task. Now, please remember, these are preliminary results because of the nature of this study and some of the country's sample sizes, but they are suggestive of a global problem. The next issue I looked at was the extent to which Christians might be distracted from God. Here the results seem even more egregious, given the biblical call to continual communion with God and the dangers of mere intermittent relationship with Him. Across continents, we see that about 6 in 10 Christians say that it's often or always true that the busyness of their life gets in the way of developing their relationship with God. 6 in 10 say that's often or always true. The distraction is most encumbering in North America, Africa, and Europe, and though not shown here, a little more likely to afflict men than women, but overall the problem is clearly a worldwide issue. Looking at the country comparison suggests that Christians in some countries are more distracted from God than Christians in other countries, with South Africans, Nigerians, and Canadians reporting the greatest challenge, and the Christians from Hong Kong, India, and Indonesia reporting the least. Even among these latter 3, though, almost half of Christians say they're usually too busy for relationship with God. Examining the problem by profession was also instructive. I've only analyzed a handful of professions to date, but what I've found thus far is that the 300 plus pastors in my data set are the most likely to say they rush from task to task. More than half of them say this has become a lifestyle for them. And looking at the spiritual consequences across professions, 65% of pastors, about 2 out of every 3 pastors, say that their busyness gets in the way of their life with God. It's tragic and ironic. The very people who could best help us escape from the bondage of busyness are themselves in chains. My data set doesn't include sufficient information to pinpoint why Christians are so busy, so hurried, so distracted from their relationship with God. But if you'll allow me to conjecture, I think the problem may be described as a vicious cycle prompted by cultural conformity. In particular, it may be the case that Christians are assimilating to a culture of busyness, hurry, and overload, which leads to God becoming more marginalized in Christians' lives, which leads to a deteriorating relationship with God, which then leads to Christians becoming even more vulnerable to adopting secular assumptions about how to live, which then leads to more conformity to a culture of busyness, hurry, and overload, and the cycle begins again. If Christians have indeed become trapped in this downward spiral, and if that is indeed compromising their relationship with God, their sanctification, and their ability to live the lives that God has ordained, then the cycle must be broken. One logical and faithful place to start is by adopting the wisdom of the Apostle Paul, who offered a remedy to the pernicious effects of cultural conformity. Do not be conformed to this age, he says, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Breaking the cycle, according to Paul, begins not with reordering our lives, but with reordering our thinking, our minds, our worldview, the way we think about who God is and how he wants us to live our lives. Slowly but inexorably, many Christians have been brainwashed into adopting this way of life that relegates God to the periphery. It's an invisible thing, but it's also an insidious thing. Slowly, inexorably, Scripture says, these effects can be reversed. God will renew our minds, aligning our thoughts with his thoughts to produce a saner, healthier, more peaceful, more God-honoring life, despite the fact that we're marinated in a speed-addicted culture. Co-laboring with him, we can once and for all break the vicious cycle that has us in bondage to busyness. How to do that is the subject of many volumes, including the fine contemporary works Freedom of Simplicity by Richard Foster, Margin by Richard Swenson, Boundaries by Henry Cloud and John Townsend, and recently I've tried my hand at this as well, creating a Lifeway Bible study called Freedom from Busyness, Biblical Help for Overloaded People. Regardless the resource we use, though, it's imperative that we extinguish this threat, this incursion on our thinking that's led to an incursion on our time, our relationships, and our health. Christians are afflicted worldwide. This study suggests that the epidemic of busyness and distraction may in fact be a pandemic, touching every corner of the globe. But the good news is that this is a curable disease. Paul diagnoses it as a disease of the mind. As we think, so we do. And as such, we should begin by treating our minds, recalibrating our assumptions about how to live, and reversing the secular brainwash that holds us in captivity. No other antidote will be a permanent one. Thanks for listening, and may God bless you with a simpler life.